The entire Silver Pines pack held its collective breath as Jonas Blackwood, the Alpha King, stood before the pristine steps of the pack house. Crimson pooled at his polished boots, yet his lethal gaze swept right past the assembled elite, locking instead onto the bruised, trembling outcast hiding deep within the shadows. The rain in the Oregon Cascades was unforgiving, but not nearly as ruthless as the Sterling family. Celia Hayes knelt on the cold, unforgiving hardwood floor of the main pack house, her hands raw and blistered from hours of scrubbing. At 22, she should have been running through the old-growth forests with the other wolves her age, attending bonfires and waiting for the goddess to reveal her mate. Instead, Celia was the Silver Pines pack's resident punching bag. She wore faded denim and an oversized gray sweater that swallowed her small frame, a stark contrast to the designer labels flaunted by the rest of the pack. "You missed a spot, Mutt." The sharp, disdainful voice belonged to Arabella Sterling, the Alpha's daughter. Arabella stood in the doorway, balancing on a pair of red-soled Louboutins, a malicious smirk painting her flawlessly contoured face. In her hand, she held a half-empty mug of black coffee. With a flick of her wrist, she tipped the mug, letting the dark, scalding liquid splash across the freshly waxed oak planks Celia had just finished polishing. Celia bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. She didn't look up. She didn't bare her teeth. To show any sign of aggression meant a week in the isolation cells, or worse, a cut to the medical funds keeping her mother, Sarah Hayes, alive in the pack clinic. "Clean it up," Arabella sneered. "The Alpha King arrives in less than 3 hours. If the estate isn't spotless, my father will have you stripped of your rank and banished to the rogue territories." "Yes, Arabella," Celia whispered, her voice rough. She grabbed her rag and leaned over the fresh stain. The impending arrival of Jonas Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Western Hemisphere, had thrown the entire Silver Pines pack into a frenzy of terrified preparation. Jonas wasn't just royalty. He was a living myth. Rumors suggested he had slaughtered his way to the throne after a rogue coalition murdered his father, decimating 3 entire bloodlines in a single night. He was merciless, calculating, and, most notably, mateless. Alpha Griffin Sterling, Arabella's father, saw the king's regional tour as a golden opportunity. He had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars renovating the estate, hiring private Michelin-starred caterers, and grooming Arabella to be the perfect Luna. Griffin's ambition was a poorly kept secret. He intended to offer his daughter to the king, securing a permanent seat at the High Council. Celia wrung out her rag in the soapy bucket, the scent of lemon and bleach burning her nose. She didn't care about the king or pack politics. All she cared about was survival. 7 years ago, her father, a high-ranking enforcer, had been accused of conspiring with a rival pack to overthrow Griffin. He was executed without a trial. Celia and her mother were instantly stripped of their status. The trauma had caused her mother's wolf to slip into a comatose state, leaving her human body frail and dependent on life support. Celia was forced into servitude to pay off their treasonous debt. By 6 p.m., the atmosphere in the estate was suffocating. A fleet of 6 matte black armored SUVs crawled up the winding gravel driveway, their headlights cutting through the dense evening fog. Celia stood hidden behind the velvet curtains of the service hallway, watching the spectacle. The pack had arranged themselves in a strict hierarchy on the front lawn, despite the freezing drizzle. Alpha Griffin stood at the forefront, his chest puffed out, with Arabella beside him draped in a custom emerald silk gown that clung to her curves. The door of the lead SUV opened. The air pressure in the courtyard instantly plummeted. Celia gasped, her hands flying to her chest as an invisible, suffocating weight crashed over the estate. It was his aura, the pure, unfiltered power of the Alpha King. Several lower-ranking wolves whimpered, their knees buckling under the sheer dominance radiating from the man stepping out of the vehicle. Jonas Blackwood was a terrifying masterpiece of a man. Standing at 6'4", he possessed a lethal grace. He wore a tailored midnight blue suit that strained against his broad shoulders, his jet-black hair slicked back, save for one rebellious lock resting against his forehead. But it was his eyes that froze Celia's breath in her lungs. They were a piercing glacial silver. As Jonas walked up the steps, Alpha Griffin immediately dropped to one knee, baring his neck. The rest of the pack followed suit like falling dominoes. "Welcome to Silver Pines, my king," Griffin announced, his voice trembling slightly despite his bravado. "We are honored to host you." Jonas didn't look at Griffin. He didn't acknowledge the bowing wolves. His silver eyes were entirely unfocused, scanning the air as if searching for a phantom. He inhaled sharply, his sharp jawline ticking. From her hiding spot 50 feet away, Celia's heart hammered against her ribs. A sudden, agonizing spike of heat erupted at the base of her neck. Her inner wolf, dormant and silent for years under the weight of her abuse, suddenly clawed wildly at her consciousness. Mate! The word echoed in Celia's mind, terrifying and impossible. "No," Celia thought, panic seizing her throat. "No, it can't be." Jonas's head snapped up. His silver gaze locked onto the exact window where Celia stood concealed behind the velvet. Even through the glass, through the heavy fabric, Celia felt the physical impact of his stare. It felt like being struck by lightning. "My king?" Griffin prompted nervously, rising slowly. Jonas broke his gaze from the window, his expression shifting into a mask of cold indifference. He looked down at Griffin, then at Arabella, who was fluttering her eyelashes and trying to push her chest forward. "Inside," Jonas commanded, his voice a dark, resonant baritone that sent a shiver down Celia's spine. "Now." Celia stumbled back from the window, pressing her hands against her burning neck. The Alpha King was her mate. The most powerful, ruthless man in their world was bound to the lowest, most broken Omega in Silver Pines. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a death sentence. If Griffin found out, he would kill her before Jonas ever got the chance to reject her. The grand banquet hall was an ocean of crystal, gold, and forced laughter. The long mahogany tables were laden with roasted meats, rare vintages, and decadent desserts. At the head table, sitting on an ornate chair that looked dangerously close to a throne, was Jonas Blackwood. His beta, a heavily scarred man named Wyatt Carmichael, stood silently behind him. Jonas looked thoroughly bored, nursing a glass of bourbon. Griffin Sterling was talking a mile a minute, boasting about his pack's financial investments and land acquisitions, while Arabella sat directly across from the king, doing everything in her power to capture his attention. Celia remained in the shadows of the servants' corridor, her hands trembling as she balanced a heavy silver tray of champagne flutes. The head housekeeper, an older woman named Martha, who was the only person relatively kind to Celia, nudged her shoulder. "Take this to the high table, Celia," Martha whispered, her eyes sympathetic but firm. "And keep your head down. Don't look him in the eye." "Martha, please," Celia begged, her voice barely a breath. "Send someone else. I can't go near him." Every second she spent in the same building as Jonas made her blood boil with a magnetic, agonizing pull. It took every ounce of her willpower not to submit to the bond and run to him. "You have to. Arabella specifically requested you serve them." "It's a power play, honey. Just do it quickly and get out." Swallowing her terror, Celia pushed through the swinging doors. The noise of the banquet hall washed over her. She kept her chin tucked to her chest, her eyes fixed on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. With every step she took toward the high table, the pull grew stronger. It felt like walking through a magnetic field. As she neared the table, she could hear Arabella's sickly sweet voice. "I've always believed that an alpha's strength is only as formidable as the Luna standing beside him," Arabella was saying, practically purring. "Don't you agree, Your Majesty?" Jonas didn't answer. His glacial eyes had shifted from his glass of bourbon to the small, trembling servant approaching the table. Celia stopped at the edge of the table, her hands shaking so badly the crystal flutes rattled against each other. She moved to place a fresh glass of champagne in front of Arabella. It happened in a fraction of a second. As Celia leaned forward, Arabella casually shifted her leg, hooking her stiletto perfectly behind Celia's ankle. Celia pitched forward. She twisted violently to avoid throwing the tray of glass and alcohol over the king. The heavy silver tray crashed onto the floor, sending shattered crystal and champagne flying across the priceless rug. Several shards sliced deeply into Celia's palms and forearms as she hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of her. The grand hall instantly fell dead silent. The music stopped. "You clumsy, worthless bitch!" Griffin roared, his chair screeching as he shot to his feet. He had been looking for a reason to assert his dominance in front of the king, to show how strictly he disciplined his subordinates. This was his moment. Griffin marched around the table, his eyes flashing wolf yellow. He grabbed Celia by the collar of her frayed sweater, hauling her off the floor. Celia gasped, her hands bleeding freely onto her clothes. "I apologize for this embarrassment, my king," Griffin snarled, raising his massive hand to strike Celia across the face. "This mutt is the daughter of a traitor. She has no discipline. I will handle her." Griffin's hand swung down. It never connected. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Jonas Blackwood had moved faster than the human eye could track. He wasn't just standing out of his chair. He was right in front of them. His large, rings-adorned hand was wrapped around Griffin's wrist like a steel vice. The air pressure in the room became unbearable. Glasses on the tables began to crack under the sheer, suffocating weight of the king's killing intent. "Touch her," Jonas whispered, his voice a terrifyingly calm, venomous hiss, "and I will tear your arm from its socket and beat you to death with it." Griffin's face drained of all color. He released Celia's sweater instantly, stammering, "My king, she ruined the service. She is a broken Omega." Crack! A sickening snap echoed through the silent hall as Jonas squeezed his grip. Griffin let out a choked scream, dropping to his knees as his wrist bones shattered under the king's immense strength. Jonas discarded Griffin's broken arm like garbage and stepped over him. Celia remained on her knees amid the shattered glass and spilled champagne, staring up at the man towering over her. Her breathing was frantic. He was so close she could smell his scent wood smoke, dark leather, and the crisp bite of a winter storm. Jonas knelt gracefully, ignoring the glass crunching beneath his polished boots. The terrifying aura radiating from him vanished entirely as he looked at her. His silver eyes, previously cold and empty, were suddenly ablaze with a desperate, ancient warmth. Slowly, carefully, as if she were made of spun sugar, Jonas reached out. He gently took her bleeding hands in his, ignoring the blood staining his immaculate suit. He lifted his other hand, using his thumb to softly wipe a stray tear from Celia's dirt-smudged cheek. The entire pack of Silver Pines watched in horrified, stunned silence. Arabella looked as though she might faint. "I have torn this continent apart looking for you," Jonas murmured, his voice thick with an emotion that made the breath catch in Celia's throat. He didn't care about the hundreds of eyes on them. He didn't care about the Alpha writhing in pain on the floor. Jonas Blackwood, the lethal Alpha King, leaned forward, resting his forehead gently against Celia's. "Will you give me my sons and carry my name?" he asked, his voice echoing clearly across the silent, shell-shocked room. Before Celia could even process the words, Griffin, clutching his ruined arm, spat from the floor. "My king, you are making a grave error. She is a traitor's spawn. She has no wolf. She is nothing." Jonas turned his head slightly, his eyes burning with a murderous golden light. "A traitor?" Jonas laughed, a dark, humorless sound that chilled the room. "Your Alpha has lied to you all for 7 years. Her father was no traitor. He was trying to protect her from you, Griffin. Because Celia Hayes is no mere Omega." Jonas stood up, pulling Celia up with him and tucking her securely against his broad chest. "She is the last living heir of the Crescent Moon bloodline, and she is my destined queen." The grand banquet hall of Silver Pines was locked in a state of absolute paralysis. The opulent crystal chandeliers seemed to dim against the suffocating, heavy aura radiating from Jonas Blackwood. He held Celia securely against his chest, completely ignoring the blood from her lacerated hands, soaking into his custom Tom Ford suit. "The Crescent Moon," Griffin choked out from the floor, cradling his shattered wrist against his chest. His face was a mask of gray terror. That bloodline was wiped out in the massacre of 1,999. It's impossible. You're bluffing to justify taking a beautiful toy, my king. Jonas didn't even grant Griffin the dignity of a glance. He nodded sharply to his beta, Wyatt. Wyatt stepped forward, pulling a thick leather folder from his jacket. He tossed it onto the shattered glass and spilled champagne beside Griffin. Glossy photographs and bank statements spilled out. "We traced the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands back to you, Griffin," Wyatt said, his voice cold and clinical. "Millions of dollars deposited by the Black Creek Rogue faction over the last decade. In exchange, you gave them the coordinates of the Crescent Moon Pack's hidden settlement. Celia's father, Arthur Hayes, discovered your treason. You had him framed and executed before he could reach the High Council. A collective murmur of horror rippled through the Silver Pines pack. Whispers turned into furious glares directed at their alpha. Arabella, realizing her empire of privilege was crumbling, scrambled forward on her hands and knees. Her emerald silk gown snagged on a jagged piece of crystal, tearing audibly. "My king, please," she sobbed, mascara running down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "I didn't know! I can still be your Luna! I am pure-blooded. I am trained for court. She is just a broken—" "Silence," Jonas commanded, the single word hitting the room like a physical shockwave. He looked down at Arabella, his silver eyes devoid of mercy. "You made my mate scrub your floors. You poured scalding coffee on her hands. You will spend the rest of your miserable life in the underground cells of the Obsidian High Pack, scrubbing the stone floors with a toothbrush until your fingers bleed. If you speak to her again, I will remove your tongue." Arabella collapsed, weeping hysterically as two massive obsidian enforcers dragged her away by her arms. Jonas looked down at Celia. The terrified, bruised girl was staring up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. Her chest heaved. The dormant wolf inside her, suppressed by years of trauma and malnourishment, was suddenly thrashing against her ribs, howling in recognition of its true mate. "My mother," Celia whispered, her voice cracking. It was the only thing she could think about. If she left, they would pull the plug on Sarah Hayes. "Jonas, my mother is in the clinic. She's on life support." Jonas's expression softened, a stark contrast to the monster he had just been seconds prior. He gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I know, little moon. I've already handled it." Right on cue, the heavy, rhythmic thumping of helicopter rotors shook the estate's glass windows. Outside, a state-of-the-art Sikorsky S-76 medevac chopper, emblazoned with the Royal Obsidian crest, touched down on the expansive front lawn, crushing Griffin's prized rose bushes. A team of elite medical personnel rushed toward the Pack Clinic. "She is being transferred to a private intensive care unit in Jackson Hole," Jonas assured her, effortlessly lifting Celia into his arms. She weighed practically nothing to him. "She will have the best neurospecialists from Johns Hopkins monitoring her around the clock. You never have to fear for her again." As Jonas carried her out of the suffocating pack house, Celia buried her face in the crook of his neck, inhaling the intoxicating scent of wood smoke and winter storms. For the first time in 7 years, she felt safe. Behind them, Wyatt addressed the remaining members of Silver Pines. "Griffin Sterling is hereby stripped of his rank and sentenced to the High Security Penitentiary for high treason. The Silver Pines Pack is now under martial law, overseen by the Obsidian Guard." The flight to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, aboard Jonas's customized Gulfstream G650ER, felt like a fever dream. Celia sat wrapped in a heated cashmere blanket on a plush leather sofa, watching in stunned silence as an onboard trauma doctor meticulously cleaned and stitched the deep cuts on her hands. Jonas sat opposite her, his elbows resting on his knees, his silver eyes tracking her every flinch. He had stripped off his ruined suit jacket, the rolled-up sleeves of his dress shirt revealing forearms corded with muscle and intricate runic tattoos. "Why me?" Celia finally asked, her voice raspy. The doctor packed his bag and bowed out, leaving them alone in the cabin. "You are the king. You could have anyone. I don't even have a wolf anymore. She won't speak to me." Jonas moved across the cabin, kneeling in front of her. He took her newly bandaged hands in his, pressing his lips gently against her knuckles. "The Crescent Moonwolves were the most powerful healers and fiercely loyal warriors in our history," Jonas murmured, looking up into her eyes. "My father spent his life searching for survivors of the 1999 massacre. When I took the throne, I continued his search. I didn't just find a survivor, Celia. I found my soul. My wolf has been clawing at my mind for a decade, demanding I find you." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against her knees. "Your wolf isn't gone, Celia. She is hiding because she was trying to keep you alive. When you are ready, when you feel safe, she will wake." 3 months in the sprawling, fortified Obsidian estate in the Teton Range changed everything. Under the care of top-tier physicians and a specialized diet, Celia's frail body healed. The hollows of her cheeks filled out, her skin took on a healthy, radiant glow, and the dark circles under her eyes vanished. But the most profound change was internal. Jonas never pushed her, never demanded intimacy or a public coronation. He spent his evenings sitting with her in the estate's vast library, reading to her, slowly proving that his hands were made to protect her, not break her. Their bond deepened into something unbreakable. The magnetic pull of the mate bond transitioned into a profound, consuming love, and on a quiet, snow-covered evening in December, sitting by a roaring fireplace, Celia's wolf finally woke up. She shifted for the first time in 7 years, a magnificent, blindingly white wolf with striking silver eyes. Jonas had dropped to his knees in the snow, baring his neck to his queen. But peace in the werewolf world is always a fragile illusion. The remnants of the Black Creek rogue faction, the same terrorists Griffin had funded, realized that with the Crescent Moon heir alive, their long-held territories were in jeopardy. They knew Jonas was invincible in direct combat, so they waited until the Alpha King was summoned to a diplomatic summit in Europe, leaving Celia at the Wyoming estate with a heavy guard. It was a Tuesday at 2 a.m. when the estate's perimeter alarms shrieked. Celia was asleep in the master suite when the scent of ozone, gunpowder, and sour rogue blood hit her heightened senses. She sat up instantly. The heavy oak door of her bedroom burst open. Wyatt stood there, his face streaked with blood, a tactical rifle in his hands. "My queen, we have a breach. Dozens of them. They bypassed the outer kinetic shields using inside intel. We need to get you to the panic room." "No," Celia said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the sudden ringing authority of an alpha. She didn't feel fear. The terrified, abused servant girl from Silver Pines was dead. In her place stood the queen of the Obsidian Pack. She threw off the silk sheets. "They came for me. I will not hide while my people bleed." Celia raced down the grand staircase, her white nightgown billowing behind her. In the main foyer, chaos had erupted. Obsidian enforcers were locked in brutal hand-to-hand combat with heavily scarred rogue wolves. A massive gray rogue broke through the defense line, locking his manic yellow eyes on Celia. He lunged, his jaws snapping toward her throat. Celia didn't flinch. Her bones cracked and reformed in a fraction of a second. She shifted midair, a fluid explosion of white fur and lethal muscle. The Crescent Moon wolf met the rogue in the air, her jaws locking onto his throat with terrifying precision. They hit the marble floor, but Celia was already up, tossing the lifeless rogue aside. Her white coat gleamed under the emergency lights, a beacon of raw, untamed power. Seeing their queen fighting on the front lines sent a surge of adrenaline through the Obsidian guards. With a deafening battle cry, they rallied, pushing the rogues back. Celia fought with a brutal, graceful efficiency, her ancient bloodline singing in her veins. By the time the sun crested over the Teton Mountains, the foyer was secure, the remaining rogues captured or dead. When Jonas's jet touched down hours later, he tore through the estate doors like a hurricane, his eyes wild with panic. He found Celia in the medical wing, sitting on a cot, wearing a borrowed oversized hoodie, gently holding an ice pack to a bruised rib while the doctors tended to the wounded guards. Jonas dropped to his knees in front of her, burying his face in her stomach, his massive shoulders shaking. "I should have been here. I will burn their entire bloodline to ash for daring to touch this house." Celia smiled softly, threading her fingers through his thick, dark hair. "They are already handled, my love. And you can't go burning down forests right now. We have preparations to make." Jonas pulled back, looking up at her, confusion warring with his lingering terror. "Preparations?" Celia took his large, calloused hand and pressed it flat against her stomach. "Your pack needs a nursery, Jonas." The lethal Alpha King, the most feared man in the Western Hemisphere, let out a choked sob, pressing his forehead against hers. 7 months later, the Obsidian estate echoed with the piercing cries of new life. The kingdom rejoiced as Celia gave birth to twin boys Arthur, named after her martyred father, and Julian, a strong Obsidian name. They were born with Jonas's dark hair and Celia's striking crescent moon eyes. On the day of their presentation, Celia stood on the grand balcony of the estate, dressed in a sweeping gown of midnight blue and silver. Jonas stood behind her, his arms wrapped securely around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Below them, thousands of wolves from allied packs across the continent roared in absolute loyalty. Celia looked out over the sprawling territories, the heavy golden crown resting securely on her head. The abuse of her past was nothing but ash, replaced by the fierce, unwavering devotion of the Alpha King who stood by her side. She had not only carried his name and birthed his heirs, but she had rewritten the legacy of her bloodline, ruling their world not with fear, but with unbreakable strength. Celia looked out over the sprawling territories, the heavy golden crown resting securely on her head. The abuse of her past was nothing but ash, replaced by the fierce, unwavering devotion of the Alpha King beside her. She had not only carried his name and birthed his powerful sons, but she had rewritten the legacy of her bloodline, ruling their new world not with fear, but with unbreakable, luminous strength.